The morning sun filtered through the windows of Riverside High School as students rushed through the crowded hallways. Among them was a girl who walked differently from everyone else. Her name was Kennedy Davis, and today was her first day at this new school. Kennedy moved carefully through the crowd, her forearm crutches clicking against the polished floor with each step. She had cerebral palsy, a condition that affected how her muscles worked. Walking took more effort for her than it did for most people, and sometimes her words came out a little differently when she spoke. But Kennedy had never let that stop her from doing anything she set her mind to. She was 16 years old, with dark brown skin and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a backpack covered in pins about science and justice. Kennedy was smart, really smart. She was already taking classes meant for seniors, and she had big dreams of becoming a lawyer one day. Not just any lawyer, though. She wanted to fight for people's rights, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Her family had just moved to this town 3 weeks ago because her dad got a new job. Leaving her old school had been hard. She had friends there, teachers who understood her, and a place where she felt like she belonged. But Kennedy was determined to make the best of this fresh start. She took a deep breath and headed toward her first class. The stairs started almost immediately. Kennedy was used to people looking at her. Some were curious, some were kind, and some were something else entirely. She could feel eyes following her as she made her way down the hallway. She kept her head up and her expression calm. Her grandmother had always told her something important. Dignity, she would say, is something nobody can take away from you unless you let them. By lunchtime, Kennedy had survived 3 classes. The teachers seemed nice enough, and a few students had smiled at her. But she also noticed a group of boys who kept whispering and looking in her direction. They sat at a table near the windows in the cafeteria, the kind of spot that popular kids usually claimed as their territory. Kennedy grabbed her lunch and found an empty table near the back. She pulled out a book and started reading while she ate. She had learned long ago that looking busy made her feel less alone in crowded places. That's when she heard the laughter. It wasn't the good kind of laughter, the kind that comes from joy or friendship. It was the cruel kind, the kind that makes your stomach twist even before you know what it's about. 3 boys were standing near the cafeteria entrance. The tallest one had blonde hair and wore an expensive jacket with a sports team logo. His name was Preston, and Kennedy would soon learn that his family practically owned half the businesses in town. Next to him stood another boy with red hair and freckles, someone everyone called Cooper. The third boy was shorter and seemed to follow the other 2 around like a shadow. His name was Dylan. Preston was doing something that made Kennedy's chest tighten. He was walking in an exaggerated way, jerking his legs and arms awkwardly while his friends laughed. He was mocking the way she walked. Cooper was recording it on his phone, and Dylan was making comments that Kennedy couldn't quite hear, but could definitely imagine. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she forced herself to stay calm. She'd dealt with people like this before. The key was not to give them the reaction they wanted. Kennedy looked back down at her book and pretended she hadn't seen anything. But they weren't done. Over the next few days, the comments got louder. Preston and his friends would walk past her in the hallway and say things just loud enough for her to hear. They made fun of how she talked, how she moved, even what she wore. Other students noticed but looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. Kennedy tried to focus on her classes. She was doing well academically, impressing her teachers with her thoughtful questions and detailed essays. But the social part of school was becoming harder every day. The 3 boys seemed to have made her their personal target, and she couldn't understand why. She'd never done anything to them. She'd barely even spoken to them. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Kennedy was walking to her last class of the day. The hallway was packed with students rushing to beat the bell. Kennedy moved carefully, aware that bumping into someone could throw off her balance. She kept to the side, giving people space to pass. She didn't see Preston step directly into her path. One moment she was walking normally, and the next her crutch hit something hard. Preston had stuck his foot out deliberately, right where her crutch would land. The crutch slipped, and Kennedy felt herself falling. Time seemed to slow down as she tried to catch herself, but there was nothing she could do. She hit the ground hard, her books scattering across the floor. Pain shot through her knee and elbow. But worse than the physical pain was the sound of laughter. Preston and his friends were laughing, and Cooper had his phone out recording the whole thing. Kennedy lay there for a moment, stunned and humiliated. Students had stopped to stare, creating a circle around her. Some looked concerned, but nobody moved to help. They all knew who Preston was, knew his father donated huge amounts of money to the school. Nobody wanted to get on his bad side. Finally, a teacher pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Richardson, the English teacher, rushed to Kennedy's side and helped her sit up. She gathered Kennedy's crutches and books while shooting angry looks at the boys. "Can you walk, sweetie?" Mrs. Richardson asked gently. Kennedy nodded, though tears were stinging her eyes. She refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. With the teacher's help, she got back to her feet. Her knee throbbed, and she could feel a bruise forming on her elbow, but nothing was broken. Mrs. Richardson marched Preston, Cooper, and Dylan straight to the principal's office. Kennedy had to go too to give her side of the story. She explained exactly what happened, how Preston had deliberately tripped her. Cooper's phone even had the video evidence. But the next day, Kennedy learned something that made her blood boil. Preston and his friends got detention. Just detention. 3 days of sitting in a room after school. That was it. No suspension, no real consequences. The principal had apparently received a phone call from Preston's father, who reminded the school about his family's generous donations and suggested that boys will be boys, that it was probably just an accident. Kennedy sat in her bedroom that evening, staring at the ceiling. Her knee was wrapped in a bandage, and her pride was bruised even worse than her body. She thought about her grandmother's words again. Dignity is something nobody can take from you. But she also thought about another thing her grandmother used to say. Sometimes, baby girl, you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Kennedy pulled out her laptop and started typing. She documented everything that had happened since her first day at Riverside High. Every comment, every laugh, every cruel joke. She described the incident in the hallway in detail. Then she started researching. She looked up the school's policies on bullying and discrimination. She read about student rights and legal protections. As she worked, Kennedy felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a victim. She was someone who could fight back, not with fists or cruelty, but with truth and justice. Preston and his friends had picked the wrong person to mess with. They saw a disabled girl and thought she'd be an easy target. They had no idea what she was capable of. Kennedy saved her document and closed her laptop. Tomorrow was a new day and she had work to do. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was just beginning. Kennedy spent the entire weekend reading through documents and policies. Her bedroom floor was covered with printed papers, highlighted sections, and sticky notes. She'd barely touched her phone or watched any shows. This was more important. What she discovered made her angry, but it also gave her hope. The school district had clear policies about bullying and discrimination. They were required by law to protect students from harassment based on race and disability. But Kennedy noticed something interesting. None of these policies seemed to be enforced when it came to students like Preston, whose families had money and influence. She found old news articles too. 3 years ago, a student had complained about being bullied by some of the same people. Nothing had happened. 2 years ago, another incident was reported. Again, nothing. It was like there was an invisible shield protecting certain students from consequences. Kennedy's mother knocked on her door Sunday evening. "Baby, you've been in here all weekend. Are you okay?" Kennedy looked up from her laptop. "I'm doing research, Mom, for school." Her mother sat down on the edge of the bed. She knew her daughter well enough to know when something was wrong. "This is about what happened on Thursday, isn't it?" Kennedy nodded slowly. "They're not going to stop, Mom, and the school isn't going to do anything real about it, so I have to." Her mother's expression was a mix of pride and worry. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll tell us if things get worse," Kennedy promised, though she wasn't entirely sure what careful meant in this situation. She just knew she couldn't let this continue. Monday morning came too quickly. Kennedy's stomach was in knots as she walked through the school entrance. But she held her head high and kept moving forward. She had a plan now, and that made all the difference. First period went by without incident. So did second. But during the break between classes, Kennedy saw something that made her pause. A girl was sitting alone on a bench outside the library, crying quietly. She had straight black hair and glasses, and Kennedy recognized her from her math class. Kennedy walked over slowly. "Hey, are you okay?" The girl looked up surprised. She wiped her eyes quickly. I'm fine. Just having a bad day. Kennedy sat down next to her, setting her crutches aside. I'm Kennedy. I'm new here. The girl managed a small smile. I know who you are. I'm Lily. I've seen what those guys have been doing to you. I'm sorry. Something in her voice told Kennedy there was more to the story. Has something like that happened to you too? Lily hesitated, then nodded. Last year. Preston and his friends started rumors about me online. They made up lies about my family, said terrible things. I tried to report it, but nothing happened. My parents even talked to the principal, but Preston's dad made some calls and suddenly everyone acted like it was no big deal. Kennedy felt a surge of anger mixed with determination. Do you still have evidence? Screenshots or anything? Lily looked at her curiously. Yeah, I saved everything. I couldn't bring myself to delete it, even though looking at it makes me feel sick. Why? Because I'm building a case, Kennedy said simply, and I could use your help. Over the next few days, Kennedy and Lily started working together. They met in the library during lunch, away from prying eyes. Lily shared her evidence and Kennedy added it to her growing file. But they both knew they needed more than just documentation. They needed to show that this was a pattern, not just isolated incidents. Meanwhile, the harassment was getting worse. Preston and his friends seemed to sense that Kennedy wasn't backing down, and it made them more aggressive. On Tuesday, she found a cruel drawing taped to her locker. On Wednesday, someone had created a fake social media account using her name and posting horrible things. The account was the worst part. It had pictures of Kennedy that had been edited to make fun of her disability. The captions used words that made her feel sick to read. Worse, other students from school were following the account, liking the posts, sharing them. Some even added their own mean comments. Kennedy sat in her room that night staring at her phone screen. She wanted to throw the phone across the room. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. Instead, she took screenshots of everything. Every post, every comment, every like. Then she saved them all to her computer and backed them up in 3 different places. Her little brother knocked on her door. Kennedy? Mom says dinner's ready. Kennedy quickly wiped her eyes. I'll be down in a minute, Terrell. But Terrell came in anyway. He was 12 and looked up to his big sister more than anyone in the world. He saw her face and knew immediately that something was wrong. What happened? Kennedy thought about lying, about protecting him from the ugliness of what she was dealing with. But Terrell was smart. He'd figure it out eventually. Some kids at school are being mean. Really mean. Terrell's face hardened. Because of your crutches? That and because I'm black. They think I'm an easy target. Her brother sat down next to her. You're the strongest person I know, Kennedy. You're going to show them they're wrong. Kennedy hugged her little brother. Thanks, T. I needed to hear that. The next day, Kennedy discovered she wasn't as alone as she thought. Between classes, a boy approached her nervously. His name was Vincent, and he was tall with curly hair and kind eyes. He looked around to make sure nobody was watching before he spoke. I saw what they posted online, he said quietly. That's messed up. I just wanted you to know that not everyone here is like that. Kennedy was surprised. Thanks. That actually means a lot. Vincent shifted his backpack. I'm pretty good with computers. If you need help tracking down who made that account or anything technical like that, I can help. My older sister went through something similar at her school, and I learned a lot helping her deal with it. Kennedy felt a spark of hope. Really? That would be amazing.
Can you meet me and Lily in the library at lunch?
Vincent nodded and hurried off before anyone could see them talking. Kennedy understood. Standing up to Preston and his friends was risky. She didn't blame people for being scared. At lunch, the 3 of them huddled around a library computer in the back corner. Vincent pulled up the fake social media account and started typing commands that Kennedy didn't understand. After about 10 minutes, he leaned back with a satisfied smile. Got it. The account was created using the school's Wi-Fi network, and I can tell you exactly which device created it and when. Kennedy leaned forward. Can you prove it was Preston? Vincent nodded. The device ID matches the one that's been logged into the school network under Cooper's name. He's Preston's friend, right? He probably made the account for him. Kennedy felt like she'd won a small victory. She carefully documented everything Vincent showed her, making sure she had solid proof. Over the next week, more students came forward quietly. a freshman who'd been shoved into lockers, a sophomore who'd been mocked for his accent, a junior who'd been excluded from group projects because of where his family came from. Each person had a story. Each person had been hurt by the same group of boys, and each person had been ignored by the school administration. Kennedy realized this was bigger than just her experience. This was about a culture that protected bullies and punished victims who spoke up. It was about a system that valued donations and reputation more than student safety. She started an anonymous blog, writing about what was happening without using real names. She called it Truth Behind the Halls. In her first post, she wrote about what it felt like to be targeted, to be treated as less than human because of how you looked or moved. The post was honest and raw and powerful. To her surprise, the blog started getting views. Students from her school found it and shared it. Then students from other schools started reading it too. People commented with their own stories, their own experiences with bullying and discrimination. Kennedy realized she'd tapped into something much bigger than her own situation, but Preston and his friends weren't backing down either. They seemed to take her resistance as a personal challenge. On Friday afternoon, Kennedy found her locker had been vandalized with a racial slur spray painted across it. This time there were witnesses. This time there were other students who saw it and were disgusted. Kennedy stood in front of her locker, staring at the hateful word. A crowd had gathered. She could feel everyone watching her, waiting to see how she'd react. Part of her wanted to break down, to let them see how much it hurt. But a bigger part of her remembered why she was doing this. She pulled out her phone and took a picture. Then she turned to the crowd. Anyone know who did this? Nobody answered. But Kennedy saw a few people glance toward Preston's usual hangout spot near the gym entrance. That was answer enough. The vice principal came rushing over, looking horrified. Kennedy, I'm so sorry. We'll get this cleaned up immediately and find out who's responsible. Kennedy looked at him calmly. Will you? Because so far, every time something happens, nothing gets done about it. But don't worry. I'm making sure there's a record of everything. That evening, Kennedy uploaded a photo of her vandalized locker to her blog. She didn't show the slur clearly, but she described what had happened and how the school had responded to previous incidents. The post went viral. Within hours, hundreds of people had shared it. Some of them were parents. Some were teachers from other schools. Some were people who'd experienced similar things. Kennedy's phone buzzed with notifications. Her email was filling up with messages of support. But there was also something else. A local news reporter had reached out asking if she'd be willing to tell her story on camera. Kennedy stared at the email for a long time. Going public would change everything. There would be no going back. But maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Maybe the only way to fix a broken system was to expose it to the light. She clicked reply and started typing. Yes, I'd like to tell my story, but I want to do more than that. I want to talk about how schools protect bullies when their families have money and power. I want to talk about how students like me are left to fend for themselves. Kennedy hit send before she could change her mind. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Preston and his friends had no idea what was coming. They thought they could break her spirit with their cruelty. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The news interview aired on Tuesday evening. Kennedy sat with her parents on the couch, watching herself on the television screen. Her hands were shaking slightly, but on screen she looked calm and confident. She'd chosen her words carefully, explaining not just what had happened to her, but why it mattered. The reporter had been respectful, asking good questions and letting Kennedy tell her story without interruption. Kennedy talked about the harassment, the fake social media account, the vandalized locker. She showed the evidence she'd collected. But most importantly, she talked about how the school had failed to protect her and other students because certain families had money and influence. By Wednesday morning, the interview had been shared thousands of times online. Kennedy's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from people she'd never met, telling her how brave she was. But she didn't feel brave. She felt nervous about what would happen when she walked into school. The moment she entered the building, she knew everything had changed. Students stared at her, but differently than before. Some looked at her with respect. Others whispered and pointed. A few came up to thank her for speaking out. But Kennedy could also feel the anger radiating from certain corners of the hallway. Preston stood near his locker with Cooper and Dylan, his face red with fury. He'd seen the interview. His father had definitely seen it. And Kennedy knew they weren't going to let this slide. She made it through her first 2 classes without incident. Teachers treated her normally, though she caught a few giving her sympathetic looks. During 3rd period, she was called to the principal's office. Her stomach dropped, but she gathered her things and made her way there. Principal Henderson sat behind his large desk, looking uncomfortable.
Kennedy, I saw your interview.
I want you to know that we take these allegations very seriously. Kennedy met his eyes steadily. Do you? Because I've reported incidents multiple times and nothing has changed. The principal shifted in his seat. We're limited in what we can do. Student privacy laws, due process, these things take time. Kennedy had expected this response. She'd researched enough to know what he could and couldn't say. That's interesting because when I looked up the district policies, it says schools must take immediate action to stop harassment and protect victims. It doesn't say anything about waiting or taking time. Principal Henderson's expression tightened. Kennedy, I understand you're upset, but going to the media wasn't the appropriate way to handle this. Kennedy leaned forward slightly. Neither was ignoring my complaints because Preston's dad donates money to the school. But here we are. The principal didn't have a good response to that. He dismissed her with a warning to avoid any confrontations and a promise that he'd look into the situation more thoroughly. Kennedy knew that promise was empty, but she also knew something else. The interview had put pressure on the school. They couldn't ignore her anymore, not with the community watching. Lunch period arrived and Kennedy headed to the cafeteria with Lily and Vincent. The 3 of them had become close over the past week, united by their shared mission. As they sat down with their food, Kennedy noticed the atmosphere in the room was different, tense. Preston and his friends were at their usual table, but they kept looking over at Kennedy. She could see them talking, their expressions angry. Cooper was on his phone, probably reading comments about the interview. Dylan looked nervous, like he wanted to be anywhere but there. Then something unexpected happened. A girl from Kennedy's history class walked over to their table. Her name was Rachel, and she was one of those students who usually stayed neutral, never getting involved in drama. She set her tray down next to Lily. Can I sit with you guys? She asked quietly. Kennedy nodded, surprised. Of course. Rachel glanced over at Preston's table before speaking. I should have said something before. Last year, they spread rumors about me when I wouldn't go out with Preston. I was too scared to report it because of who his family is. But after seeing your interview, I realized staying quiet just lets them keep doing it to other people. Over the next few minutes, 3 more students joined their table. Each one had a story. Each one had been hurt by Preston and his friends. Each one had stayed silent out of fear. Kennedy realized that her speaking out had given others permission to do the same. But Preston had noticed the gathering at Kennedy's table. She saw him stand up, saw the anger in his eyes as he started walking toward them. Cooper and Dylan followed, though Dylan looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Preston stopped right in front of Kennedy's table, his hands balled into fists. You think you're so smart, don't you? Going on TV, making up lies about people. Kennedy looked up at him calmly, though her heart was racing. I didn't make up anything. Everything I said was true, and I have proof. His face got redder. You've ruined my life. College scouts are asking questions now. My dad is furious, all because you couldn't take a joke. Kennedy stood up slowly, steadying herself with her crutches. A joke? You call racism and making fun of my disability a joke? The cafeteria had gone completely quiet. Everyone was watching. Teachers at the lunch duty table were starting to move toward them, but Kennedy kept talking. You tripped me in the hallway on purpose. You created fake accounts to mock me. You spray-painted a slur on my locker. Those aren't jokes, Preston. That's harassment. That's hate. Preston took a step closer, trying to intimidate her. Nobody's going to believe you over me. Kennedy pulled out her phone. She'd prepared for this moment. I have videos of you mocking me. Screenshots of the fake accounts Vincent traced back to Cooper's device. Photos of my vandalized locker. Statements from 7 different students about things you've done to them. The school might protect you, but the truth doesn't care about your father's money. Cooper grabbed Preston's arm, trying to pull him back. Dude, let's just go. But Preston was too angry to think clearly. You're going to regret this. A teacher finally reached them. Preston, my office now. You too, Cooper and Dylan. As they were led away, Preston shot Kennedy a look of pure hatred. But Kennedy didn't flinch. She sat back down, her hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. The cafeteria slowly came back to life, but students kept looking at her with new respect. That afternoon, Kennedy had one more card to play. The school was having an assembly for all students, one of those mandatory meetings about respect and kindness that schools hold when there's been drama. Kennedy had known about it for days. She'd also known it would be the perfect opportunity. With Vincent's help, she'd prepared something special. Vincent was in the audiovisual club and he had access to the equipment used for assemblies. They'd spent hours getting everything ready, testing it multiple times to make sure it would work. The auditorium filled with students. Kennedy sat near the front with Lily and Vincent, her laptop bag on her lap. Principal Henderson stood at the podium, starting his speech about the importance of treating each other with dignity and respect. The irony wasn't lost on Kennedy. Preston and his friends were sitting in the back, looking smug. They'd been called to the office but hadn't faced any real consequences yet. Kennedy could see them whispering and laughing, probably thinking they'd gotten away with everything once again. The principal droned on for several minutes. Then he announced that they'd be showing a short video about anti-bullying. This was Kennedy's moment. She gave Vincent a subtle nod. The lights dimmed. The projector screen came to life. But instead of the anti-bullying video the principal had planned, something else started playing. Vincent had hijacked the system remotely, just like they'd practiced. The screen showed a compilation Kennedy had put together. It started with the video of Preston mocking her walk in the cafeteria. Then it showed screenshots of the fake social media account with timestamps, photos of her vandalized locker, clips of Preston and his friends harassing other students, footage that various people had shared with Kennedy over the past week. The principal realized something was wrong and tried to stop it, but Vincent had locked the system. The video kept playing. Kennedy's voiceover began, calm and clear. "My name is Kennedy Davis. For the past month, I've been harassed because I'm black and because I have a disability. The students you're watching in these videos are Preston Wright, Cooper Mills, and Dylan Torres. They've targeted multiple students over the years, but nothing has ever been done about it because their families have money and influence." The auditorium was completely silent. Students stared at the screen in shock. Teachers looked between the screen and the principal, unsure what to do. Preston had gone pale. The video continued, showing more evidence, more incidents. Kennedy had organized it carefully, presenting everything in a clear, factual way. She ended with this statement: "I'm not showing you this for revenge. I'm showing you this because silence protects bullies. This school has policies against harassment and discrimination, but those policies only matter if they're enforced for everyone, not just students whose families can't make large donations. Real change starts when we stop pretending everything is fine and start demanding better." The screen went black. The lights came back on. Principal Henderson stood at the podium, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Preston was already halfway out of his seat trying to leave, but a teacher blocked his way. Kennedy stood up, balancing on her crutches. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Students started talking all at once. Some were pulling out their phones, already sharing what had just happened. Teachers were rushing toward the principal, demanding to know what was going on. And Preston was finally realizing that his actions had consequences. As Kennedy walked out of the auditorium, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. She'd done it. She'd stood up, not with anger or violence, but with truth and courage. Preston and his friends had tried to break her, but instead she'd shown everyone who was really strong. Lily caught up to her in the hallway. That was incredible. Vincent joined them, grinning. "Did you see their faces?" That was perfect. Kennedy allowed herself a small smile. "It's not over yet, but this is a good start." She was right. The real battle was just beginning. But now she wasn't fighting alone. Now people were paying attention. And most importantly, now the school couldn't pretend nothing was wrong. The truth was out there, and there was no taking it back. As Kennedy headed to her next class, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Rachel and the other students who'd sat with her at lunch. Behind them were more students, ones she'd never even spoken to before. "We want to help," Rachel said. "Whatever comes next, we're with you." Kennedy looked at the group of students standing with her, and for the first time since moving to this school, she didn't feel alone. She'd fought back fearlessly, and in doing so, she'd inspired others to find their own courage. That was worth more than any victory she could have imagined. The video from the assembly spread like wildfire. By that evening, it was everywhere. Students had recorded Kennedy's presentation on their phones and shared it across every social media platform. Local news picked it up again. Then regional news. Within 48 hours, Kennedy's story had gone national. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations reached out to offer support. Lawyers contacted her parents, offering to take the case pro bono. The attention was overwhelming, but Kennedy knew it was necessary. Sunlight, her father always said, was the best disinfectant. At school, everything had changed overnight. Principal Henderson had been placed on administrative leave, while the district conducted an investigation. The superintendent herself had come to the school, meeting with students and parents, promising that things would be different. Kennedy wanted to believe her, but she'd learned to wait and see what people actually did, not just what they said. Preston, Cooper, and Dylan were suspended immediately. Not just for a few days this time, but indefinitely pending the investigation. The school board had scheduled an emergency meeting, and suddenly everyone was taking things seriously. Funny how that happened once the cameras showed up, but the real consequences were happening outside the school walls. That's what Kennedy learned on Thursday when Lily showed her something on her phone during lunch. "Look at this," Lily said, pulling up a news article. Preston's football scholarship offer was withdrawn. Kennedy read the article carefully. The college had released a statement saying they didn't tolerate discrimination or harassment and had decided to rescind their offer after reviewing the evidence. Two other schools that had been recruiting Preston had done the same thing. Cooper's situation was similar. He'd been planning to attend a prestigious university on his parents' connections, but the admissions office was now reviewing his application in light of the recent events. The article mentioned that the fake social media account had been traced directly to his device, and creating content to harass and discriminate against other students was a serious violation of the school's code of conduct. Kennedy felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her felt vindicated. These boys had tried to destroy her, and now they were facing real consequences. But another part of her, the part that wanted to be a lawyer and fight for justice, knew this was about more than revenge. It was about accountability. Vincent joined them at the table, setting down his lunch tray. "Have you seen what's happening online? People are digging up everything Preston and his friends ever posted. Some of it is really bad. Kennedy had seen some of it. Years of posts that showed a pattern of racist comments, mocking people with disabilities and generally treating others as less than human. It painted a clear picture of who these boys really were when they thought nobody important was watching. Dylan's the only one showing any remorse," Vincent continued. "He posted an apology this morning." It actually seemed genuine. Kennedy had seen that too. Dylan's apology was different from what she'd expected. He didn't make excuses or try to minimize what he'd done. He admitted he'd gone along with Preston and Cooper because he wanted to fit in, because he was afraid of becoming their target instead. He acknowledged that his fear didn't excuse his actions and that he'd hurt people. He ended by saying he was getting counseling and trying to understand why he'd made such terrible choices. "That takes courage," Lily said quietly. "Admitting you were wrong in front of everyone." Kennedy nodded. "It doesn't undo what he did, but at least he's taking responsibility." The following week brought more changes. Kennedy's parents had decided to file a formal complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, the federal agency that investigates discrimination in schools. A lawyer named Ms. Patterson, who specialized in civil rights cases, had agreed to represent them. She was sharp, experienced, and passionate about holding institutions accountable. Ms. Patterson came to their house on Saturday to discuss the case. She sat at the dining room table, her laptop open, taking notes as Kennedy and her parents explained everything that had happened. "What you've documented here is remarkable," Ms. Patterson said, reviewing Kennedy's evidence. "You have a strong case not just against the students who harassed you, but against the school district for failing to protect you. The pattern of behavior, the preferential treatment based on family wealth, the retaliation when you spoke up, all of this violates federal law." Kennedy's mother reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "What happens next?" Ms. Patterson explained the process. The complaint would trigger an investigation. The district would have to provide all their records related to the incidents. Other students who'd been harassed would be interviewed, The investigation could take months, but if they found that the school had violated Kennedy's rights, there would be significant consequences. "We're not just seeking damages," Ms. Patterson continued. "We're pushing for systemic change, new policies, mandatory training for staff, an independent review board for harassment complaints. The goal is to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." That's what Kennedy wanted. This had never been about money or even about punishing Preston and his friends. It was about fixing a broken system. Back at school, Kennedy noticed something interesting happening. Other students were speaking up now. Not just about Preston and his group, but about other problems in the school. The student council called a special meeting to discuss creating a peer support system for students who experienced harassment. Teachers started having real conversations about bias and discrimination in their classrooms. It wasn't perfect. Some students still blamed Kennedy for causing drama. Some parents complained that she'd ruined Preston's future over what they called teenage mistakes. But more people supported her than opposed her, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, Kennedy was studying in the library when someone unexpected approached her table. It was Courtney, one of Preston's ex-girlfriends and part of the popular crowd. Kennedy braced herself for confrontation, but Courtney's expression wasn't hostile. "Can we talk?" Courtney asked quietly. Kennedy gestured to the empty chair. Courtney sat down, fidgeting with her bracelet before speaking. "I wanted to apologize. I saw what Preston was doing to you, and I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I didn't want to get involved. But that was wrong. Staying silent made me part of the problem." Kennedy studied her carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" Courtney took a deep breath. "'Cause I've been thinking about all the times Preston said terrible things and I just laughed it off. All the times he made racist jokes or mocked people, and I acted like it was no big deal because I didn't want him to turn on me. I was a coward and I'm sorry. It takes strength to admit that," Kennedy said. Courtney met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that you changed something in me. In a lot of us, actually. You showed us what real courage looks like." After Courtney left, Kennedy sat quietly for a moment. She hadn't expected that conversation, but it reminded her that people could change, that standing up for what was right sometimes inspired others to examine their own behavior. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. It was open to the public and the auditorium was packed. Kennedy attended with her parents and Ms. Patterson. Lily, Vincent, and Rachel were there too, along with dozens of other students and their families. The board members sat at a long table at the front, looking uncomfortable as community members lined up to speak during the public comment period. One by one, people shared their experiences and concerns. Parents talked about their children being bullied. Students described harassment they'd endured. Teachers admitted they'd felt powerless to stop certain behaviors because of pressure from wealthy families. When it was Kennedy's turn to speak, she walked to the microphone with her crutches, her statement prepared. She'd practiced it multiple times, but her heart still raced as she looked out at the crowd. "My name is Kennedy Davis, and I'm a student at Riverside High School. I'm here because the system that's supposed to protect students like me failed. Not because the policies don't exist, but because those policies weren't enforced equally for all students." She paused, making sure her voice stayed steady. "When students from wealthy families harassed me because of my race and disability, the school gave them detention. When I tried to report it through proper channels, I was told these things take time. But when I went public with my story, suddenly the school could move very quickly. That tells me the school always had the power to act. They just chose not to until it became embarrassing for them." Kennedy looked directly at the board members. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because every student deserves to feel safe at school, regardless of how much money their families donate. I'm here because policies only matter if they're enforced. And I'm here because change doesn't happen when we stay quiet. It happens when we demand better and refuse to accept anything less." The auditorium erupted in applause. Kennedy returned to her seat, her legs shaking but her head held high. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders, whispering how proud she was. The board deliberated for hours. When they finally emerged with their decision, it was close to midnight. The board president read their resolution. Preston and Cooper would be expelled permanently. Dylan would be allowed to return after a semester, contingent on completing counseling and community service. Principal Henderson would not be returning. The district would implement new anti-harassment policies with real consequences, and independent oversight. It wasn't everything Kennedy had hoped for, but it was substantial. More importantly, it sent a message that the old way of doing things was over. As Kennedy left the meeting that night, reporters surrounded her family with questions. Ms. Patterson handled most of them, but one reporter asked Kennedy directly how she felt about the outcome. Kennedy thought for a moment before answering. "I feel like this is just the beginning. Real change takes time, but for the first time since I started at this school, I feel like my voice actually mattered. That's something." On the drive home, Kennedy looked out the window at the dark streets passing by. She thought about everything that had happened over the past months. The harassment, the fear, the decision to fight back. She thought about the students who'd stood with her and the ones who'd found their own courage because of her example. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Just wanted to say thank you for everything you did. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Kennedy smiled and typed back a response. "We stood up together. That's what made the difference." She meant it too. She'd learned that real change wasn't something one person could create alone. It took a community of people willing to speak truth to power, to demand accountability, to refuse to accept injustice as normal. Kennedy had started that conversation, but others had joined in and amplified it. As her father pulled into their driveway, Kennedy felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be perfect, but realistic hope that things could get better, that they were already getting better, and that her fight had been worth it. 6 months had passed since the school board meeting. Kennedy walked through the hallways of Riverside High, and it felt like a completely different place. Not perfect, but better. So much better. The new principal, Dr. Reeves, had wasted no time implementing changes. She'd created a student advocacy committee, and Kennedy was one of the founding members. The committee met twice a month to discuss concerns and work directly with administration to address problems before they escalated. For the first time, students had a real voice in making the school safer and more inclusive. Kennedy adjusted her backpack as she headed to the committee meeting. She'd gotten a new set of crutches, these ones decorated with stickers of inspiring quotes and symbols. Her little brother Terrell had helped her design them, and she loved how they expressed her personality instead of just being medical equipment. The committee room was already filling up when she arrived. Lily was there, now serving as the secretary. Vincent sat at the tech station, ready to take notes and document everything. Rachel had joined too, along with students from different grades and backgrounds. The diversity was intentional. Dr. Reeves wanted to make sure every voice was represented. "All right, everyone," Kennedy said, settling into her chair at the head of the table. "Let's get started. What issues do we need to address this week?" The meeting ran smoothly. They discussed upcoming awareness events, reviewed recent incident reports, and planned a workshop on unconscious bias. This was the kind of work Kennedy loved. Not dramatic confrontations or viral videos, but steady, consistent effort to make things better. After the meeting, Dr. Reeves asked Kennedy to stay behind for a moment. She closed the door and sat down across from her. "Kennedy, I wanted to let you know that we received confirmation this morning. The Office for Civil Rights completed their investigation. They found that the school district violated federal law by failing to protect you from discrimination and harassment." Kennedy had been expecting this news, but hearing it officially still felt significant. "What does that mean?" Dr. Reeves pulled out a document. "It means the district has to enter into a resolution agreement. They're required to revise all policies, provide comprehensive training to staff, and submit to monitoring for the next 3 years. But more than that, Kennedy, it means you were right. Everything you fought for, everything you went through, it mattered." Kennedy felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "What about the other students? The ones who came forward after me?" "They're included in the settlement. The district is offering counseling services and has agreed to expunge any disciplinary records that resulted from them speaking up. Your case opened the door for real accountability." After leaving Dr. Reeves's office, Kennedy found Lily and Vincent waiting for her in the hallway. They'd become her closest friends, the people who understood what she'd been through because they'd been part of the journey. "So?" Lily asked eagerly. "What did she say?" Kennedy couldn't help but smile. "We won, officially." The three of them celebrated with a group hug, careful not to knock Kennedy off balance. It felt good. Not just the victory, but the friendship, These were people who'd stood with her when it was hard, who'd believed in her when she doubted herself. That afternoon, Kennedy had another important meeting. Ms. Patterson, her lawyer, had arranged for her to speak at a conference about student rights and advocacy. It was being held at a university 2 hours away, and Kennedy's parents were driving her there on Saturday. The conference was bigger than Kennedy had expected. Hundreds of students, teachers, and activists filled the auditorium. Kennedy sat backstage, her notes in hand, trying to calm her nerves. She'd given speeches before, but this felt different. These people had traveled to be here, to learn and share ideas about making schools safer. When it was her turn, Kennedy walked onto the stage. The audience applauded, and she saw people of all ages looking at her with interest and respect. She positioned herself at the podium, her crutches leaning against the side, and began to speak. A year ago, I was the new girl at school. I was scared, trying to fit in, hoping people would see past my disability and my skin color. Instead, I became a target. 3 students decided I was different enough to mock, to harass, to try to break down. Kennedy paused, looking out at the audience. But here's what they didn't understand. Being different isn't a weakness. It's not something to hide or apologize for. And when people try to make you feel less than because of who you are, that says everything about them and nothing about you. She talked about the harassment, but also about the decision to fight back. She explained how she documented everything, built alliances, and refused to stay silent even when it was easier to just accept things as they were. She talked about the importance of speaking truth to power and demanding accountability. The hardest part wasn't standing up to the bullies, Kennedy said. The hardest part was believing I deserved better. Because when you're told over and over that you don't matter, part of you starts to believe it. But I had people in my life who reminded me of my worth. My family, my friends, and eventually other students who found their own courage. Kennedy shared the lessons she'd learned. That change was possible but required persistence. That one person speaking up could inspire others. That systems only changed when people refused to accept the status quo. And that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing, but about creating something better for the future. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded. Kennedy felt overwhelmed by the response, but also energized. This was what she wanted to do with her life. Not just fight her own battles, but help others fight theirs. After the conference, several students approached her with their own stories. A boy who was being bullied for his religion, a girl facing discrimination because of her family's immigration status, a student dealing with harassment over their gender identity. Each one asked Kennedy for advice, and she did her best to guide them. Document everything, she told them. Find allies. Use your voice. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't matter. On the drive home, Kennedy's mother glanced at her in the rearview mirror. I'm so proud of who you've become, baby girl, Kennedy smiled. I learned from the best, Mom, her father chimed in from the driver's seat. So have you thought any more about college? Kennedy had thought about it constantly. Her grades were excellent, and her story had attracted attention from universities across the country. She'd received recruitment letters from schools she'd only dreamed about attending. Some offered full scholarships. Others promised resources for students with disabilities and strong civil rights programs. I've narrowed it down to 3 schools, Kennedy said. They all have great pre-law programs. But I'm leaning toward Howard. They have an amazing history of training civil rights lawyers, and I think being at a historically black university would be really meaningful for me. Her parents exchanged a proud look. Whatever you choose, we know you'll do amazing things. The following Monday at school, Kennedy was called to Dr. Reeves's office again. This time she found Ms. Patterson there as well, along with someone she didn't recognize. A woman in a professional suit with kind eyes. Dr. Reeves made the introduction. Kennedy, this is Dr. Chen. She's from the State Department of Education. She wanted to meet you. Dr. Chen shook Kennedy's hand warmly. Kennedy, your case has had ripple effects throughout the state. We're using what happened here as a model for reforming how schools handle discrimination complaints. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to serve on a student advisory board we're creating. Your perspective would be invaluable. Kennedy was stunned. A state-level position? She'd never imagined her actions would lead to something like this. Of course, I'd be honored. Over the next few months, Kennedy balanced schoolwork with her advocacy responsibilities. She attended state meetings, contributed to policy discussions and shared her insights about what students actually needed to feel safe. It was challenging, but incredibly rewarding. Her blog, Truth Behind the Halls, had evolved too. What started as an anonymous outlet for her frustration had become a platform where students across the country shared their stories and supported each other. Kennedy had volunteers helping moderate comments and connect students with resources. The blog had been featured in education journals and cited in policy papers. As for Preston and Cooper, Kennedy rarely thought about them anymore. She'd heard, through the grapevine, that Preston was attending community college and working part-time. Cooper had taken a gap year and was supposedly doing volunteer work, trying to rebuild his reputation. Kennedy hoped they were genuinely learning and growing, but their journey wasn't her responsibility. She'd done what she needed to do by holding them accountable. What they did with that accountability was up to them. Dylan's path had been different. After completing his counseling and community service, he'd returned to school. Kennedy had been wary at first, but Dylan seemed genuinely changed. He kept his head down, didn't seek attention, and focused on his studies. One day he'd approached Kennedy in the library. "I know you don't owe me anything," he'd said quietly, "but I wanted to tell you that the community service I did was at a disability advocacy center. Working there, hearing stories from people with different abilities, it made me realize how cruel and ignorant I was. I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry." Kennedy had looked at him carefully, measuring the sincerity in his eyes. "I appreciate you saying that. I can't forget what happened, but I respect that you're trying to be better." Dylan had nodded, not expecting more than that, and walked away. That brief exchange had shown Kennedy something important. Some people could change when given the chance. Not everyone, but some. And that possibility mattered. As senior year approached, Kennedy found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. A year ago, she'd been terrified and alone, facing harassment that seemed impossible to overcome. Now she was a leader in her school community, an advocate at the state level, and someone other students looked up to. But the most important change wasn't external. It was internal. Kennedy had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd learned that her voice mattered, that standing up for what was right wasn't just noble, but necessary. She'd learned that justice required courage, persistence, and the willingness to make people uncomfortable. On the last day of junior year, Kennedy stood in front of her advocacy committee one final time before summer break. She looked around at the group they'd built, diverse students committed to making their school better. "We've accomplished a lot this year," Kennedy said, "but there's still work to do. Changing a culture doesn't happen overnight. It requires constant effort, constant vigilance. Don't get complacent. Don't assume the job is done. Keep speaking up. Keep demanding better. Keep believing that change is possible." As students filed out for summer vacation, Lily hung back. "You know, a year ago I was terrified to even eat lunch in the cafeteria. Now I'm helping run a committee that's changing school policy. That's because of you." Kennedy shook her head. "It's because of us. I may have started something, but we built it together. That's the whole point." That evening, Kennedy sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her little brother came out and sat beside her. "You're kind of famous now," Terrell said. "Are you going to forget about us regular people when you're a big-shot lawyer?" Kennedy laughed and ruffled his hair. "Never. Besides, I'm not doing this to be famous. I'm doing it because it matters." Terrell looked at his sister with open admiration. "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." Kennedy pulled him into a side hug. "You already are, T. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Kennedy thought about her future: college, law school, a career fighting for justice. But also this moment sitting with her brother, having made a real difference in her community. Both mattered. Both were part of who she was becoming. Preston and his friends had tried to break her because she was different. Instead, she'd shown them and everyone else that being different was her greatest strength. She was Kennedy Davis, a black girl with cerebral palsy who refused to be silenced, diminished, or defeated. And this was only the beginning of her story.